Snow was falling that morning, soft and unhurried, drifting across the worn timbers of Ash Hollow's church. The bell tolled once, then again, its voice carried over the white-draped rooftops and quiet streets. Inside, faces pressed near frosted windows, eyes peering, whispers swelling. The old soul in me remembers that day like a scar remembers the knife, not for the cut itself, but for the sting that lingers long after. Beauty was weighed differently in those days, measured against the narrow hunger of men, but truth, as it often does, came from the smallest lips in the crowd. Clara May Dalton stood at the altar, her breath blooming in nervous clouds. Her dress was patched at the hem, its seams straining around her form, but her cheeks glowed with a fragile hope. She had dreamed of this moment since girlhood, hands folded, a promise spoken, a life begun. Her groom, Elias Boone, son of the wealthiest rancher in the valley, stood beside her, his jaw set, eyes restless. Clara's heart hammered in her chest, too loud, too eager. She mistook his silence for nerves. The congregation did not. Their smirks passed like contraband in a saloon, sly, cruel, and unrepentant. "Too much of her," someone whispered. Another muffled a laugh behind a gloved hand. The words fluttered like crows in Clara's ears, but she clung to hope. She closed her eyes, waiting for vows to bind her life to his. Instead, Elias's voice cracked through the church, like a whip. "I can't," he spat, stepping back. His words hung in the air, raw and merciless. "I won't marry a woman who looks like that." Gasps rippled. A chair scraped. A low laugh, quickly smothered, echoed from a back pew. Clara's knees buckled, her body folding as though the strength had been yanked from her bones. The dress pooled around her in the snow that had blown in through the church doors, its fabric damp and heavy. Her hands trembled as she tried to gather herself, but the shame was heavier than any cloth. She bowed her head, unable to meet the eyes that sliced at her like knives. Through the blur of tears she saw boots, polished, scuffed, worn, and new, all planted in a semicircle of judgment. Faces turned away, as if her shame might stain them. Only one figure stood apart, a tall man at the edge of the crowd, his long duster coat dusted with snow, his hat brim shadowing gray eyes that carried the grief of someone who had already lost too much. Marshal Cade Ellison. At his side, a small girl gripped his hand. Lila, her curls peeking from beneath a knitted bonnet, clutched a threadbare teddy bear against her chest. Her eyes, wide as lantern light, were fixed on Clara. The silence was thick, broken only by Clara's shallow breaths. Then the child moved. Lila slipped free of her father's hand and trotted forward, her boots crunching on the thin crust of snow. She stopped before Clara, so close she had to tilt her head back to see her face. The congregation watched, confused, irritated, curious. Lila bent slightly, and with the solemnity only children possess, she placed her teddy bear into Clara's lap. Then, in a clear voice that carried through the air like a hymn, she said, "She is pretty, Daddy." No one laughed. The words fell like stones into a still pond, rippling through every heart. Cade Ellison stepped forward, his spurs jingling softly in the hush. He removed his hat, bowed his head once, then extended a calloused hand toward Clara. His broad frame shielded her from the stares, his silence louder than any defense. Clara stared at his hand, but could not lift her own. Shame rooted her where she knelt, heavy and immovable. Yet something shifted inside her, the faintest spark, a glimmer pressed against the darkness. She had been seen, not as a jest, but as human, as worthy of gentleness. Snow continued to fall, landing on her dress, her hair, her trembling hands. The town held its breath. And the old soul in me whispers still of that moment. Sometimes grace arrives not in thunder, not in declarations, but in the mittened hand of a child and the quiet courage of a man who knows loneliness. Clara did not see much of Ash Hollow in the weeks that followed. She retreated to the weather-beaten cabin her father had left her, tucked among pines at the edge of the valley. The road was long, the snow deep, and the silence heavier than any ridicule she had borne. The town spoke often of her absence. Mrs. Harrow at the inn clucked her tongue, and Jed Cartwright behind the saloon bar let crude jokes slip from his lips. "Boone saved himself a life sentence," they muttered, as if cruelty could be dressed in humor. Yet Clara endured. She split kindling with hands that blistered, stitched her torn dress until needle and thread felt like prayer, and lit her stove each night against the winter's bite. Alone, yes, but not broken. Still, loneliness crept into the corners. Sometimes in the hush before sleep, she felt the laughter again, sharp as barbed wire. Sometimes she wondered if shame had carved her down to nothing. And then came the sound of boots at her door. Marshal Cade Ellison stood there, hat in hand, his daughter clinging shyly to his coat. He offered no explanations, only a basket of food. Lila carried a length of fabric. "Mama used to sew," Cade said quietly, his gaze sliding to the floor. "Thought you might help mend what I can't." Clara's throat tightened, and though words faltered, her hands reached out. That was how it began, small visits, simple exchanges. Cade delivered firewood without being asked. Lila scattered laughter through the cabin, filling corners Clara thought forever hollow. Clara showed the girl how to stitch a crooked seam, how to patch a doll's dress. In the evenings, Cade sat by the stove, fixing a chair leg, his silence companionable rather than oppressive. No declarations passed between them. Only gestures, each one a thread binding their solitude into something less lonely. Spring thawed the valley. The pines dripped, the earth softened, and Clara's world seemed to bloom again in quiet colors. She brushed snow from Lila's hair, and Lila giggled like bells. Cade's rough, hands left polished, would behind where once there was splinter. Sometimes Clara caught him watching her, eyes steady, unflinching, not at her shape, but at her presence. She turned away quickly, but her chest hummed with warmth she hadn't felt in years. Yet Ash Hollow did not forgive so easily. Elias Boone, stung by whispers of his own cowardice, found Clara a convenient target. He slurred insults at the saloon, loud enough for all to hear. "Runaway cow, hiding in the woods," he spat. Men laughed, women smirked. Cade, standing at the bar, slammed his fist against the counter. The glasses rattled. His jaw flexed, but he did not strike, not yet. The restraint was a greater violence, his silence heavier than words. Rumors flared anyway, the marshal's sweet on the fat girl. And though Clara never sought ears to hear it, the gossip crawled back to her cabin, like smoke under a door. When spring's first festival arrived, Clara almost stayed away. But Lila's hand found hers, small and insistent. "Come," the girl pleaded, tugging her along. Cade said nothing, but the way he lingered near the cabin door told her he wanted her there too. So Clara walked into Ash Hollow with a child's trust anchoring her steps. The festival square was strung with lanterns, music jangling, laughter spilling. Yet when Clara appeared, voices faltered. Eyes turned. Whispers, sharp and pitying, circled her like buzzards. Her dress was simple, patched again and again, but she walked upright, Lila's hand gripping hers like a tether. Elias Boone spotted her first. He staggered from the crowd, whiskey on his breath, arrogance in every swagger. His voice rang out, cruel and certain. "Well, look who it is, the cow come to market." Laughter flared, brittle and mean. He lurched closer, grabbing Clara's arm, as though to remind her of her place. "No man will ever." But he didn't finish. Cade Ellison stepped between them, tall as a wall of stone. He placed one hand on Elias's chest, pushing him back with a steady force. His voice was low, carrying more weight than a shout. "You've had your say. Now be silent." The crowd hushed. Even the fiddles stuttered into quiet. Cade's presence was not violent, but was unyielding, a boundary laid down like steel. Elias sputtered, then retreated, his bravado wilted beneath the marshal's gaze. Clara stood trembling, her breath shallow. All eyes were upon her again, but this time the shame did not crush her. Slowly, achingly slowly, she lifted her chin. She did not hide. She did not bow. Her eyes swept the crowd, and for once she saw them not as judges, but as witnesses to her refusal to be erased. The moment stretched, snow melt dripping from rooftops, her heart beat steady as a drum. Then Cade turned to her, not as rescuer, but as equal. He extended his hand, the same gesture he had once made outside the church, the gesture she had been too broken to accept. Now her fingers, calloused from wood and thread, slid into his palm. Not a declaration of love, but an act of quiet defiance, of dignity reclaimed. Lila beamed up at them both, eyes shining. She tugged at Cade's sleeve and whispered, just loud enough for those nearest to hear, "Told you she's pretty, Daddy." The hush broke, not with laughter this time, but with something softer, an uneasy respect, perhaps even awe. Clara's chest filled with breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and for the first time since that cruel day, she allowed herself to feel whole. And the old soul in me, the one who tells you this tale, leaves you with this. In a world eager to measure and mock, Remember that beauty is not the weight of a body, but the light carried within it. Sometimes it takes the innocence of a child, the steady hand of a lonely man, and the courage of one who will not shrink to remind us all. The prairie forgets many things, but it never forgets the sound of dignity reclaimed.